Your Royal Highnesses, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, good morning. Welcome and thank you for joining us at the Saudi Capital Markets Forum 2024, which convenes this year under the theme Powering Growth, where capital growth connects. I'm Nadine Hani, as we am kindly mentioned. I present the business news on العربية and العربية business these days. And it is such a pleasure to be here with you in Riyadh to moderate this session. This panel is titled Crafting the Greatest Success Story of the 21st Century. This is how the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia described the massive social and economic change happening here in the kingdom during his famous TV interview last September. Thanks to its steadfast commitment and Vision 2030 policies implemented across a wide range of sectors, the kingdom is now able to record non-oil GDP growth of around 5%. It is laying the grounds for a dynamic society and economy that makes use of the kingdom's strategic location, as we mentioned, between 3 continents to become a logistical and manufacturing hub, a tourism destination, a commercial, sports, and cultural center, and compete regionally and globally across a variety of sectors. So where does the kingdom stand today compared to the targets of Vision 2030? What is the cost of implementation and hence its financing requirements? We'll try to answer those questions with our esteemed lineup of speakers. I ask them to join me on stage. We have with us His Excellency Mr. Khaalid الفالح, Minister of Investment, and also His Excellency Mr. Fيصل الإبراهيم, Minister of Economy and Planning, and His Excellency Mr. Khaalid التويجري, Deputy Chairman of the NDF. Welcome. Your Excellencies, thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. I know how busy all of you are, so let us start by explaining the objectives and where are we from those objectives. So I'd like to start with you, Your Excellency Mr. Khalid Al-Falih. What are the kingdom's objectives when it comes to investments, and where are we from achieving those objectives?
Thank you very much, Nadine, and it's a pleasure to be here. Let me congratulate Sarah and Khalid Hassan and Tadawul, and I'm sure the Capital Market Authority, as their regulator, has something to do with this fantastic organization and the great turnout to this very important forum. And I can't overemphasize the importance of the financial sector, the capital markets, Tadawul, and the regulators, CMA, in terms of realizing the success of Vision 2030. It's going to impact the ambition of the nation. It's going to impact the vibrancy of the economy and society and all of this, all of the underpinnings of Vision 2030. I think the story of Vision 2030 is truly reverberating around the world. I mean, when His Royal Highness says we're going to be the success story of this century, it may sound an exaggeration, but I can tell you when I travel the world today, this is what I hear from investors in particular. We just came from Davos a couple of weeks ago, and I can tell you Saudi Arabia was the story of the World Economic Forum 2024. 2023 was also. The unfortunate turbulence going on around the world, geopolitical, security, economic, that His Excellency Al-Jad'an spoke about in the beginning of his session, makes Saudi Arabia and the GCC at large, but Saudi Arabia in particular, stands out as a beacon of hope, as an island of stability, as a destination for global investor, whether they are companies that operate in their sectors, own assets, build projects, and stay with them for decades, or they're financial investors looking to get the proper risk-return trade-off in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Now, going back to your question, what is the role of investments and how are we doing so far. The ambitions of Vision 2030, which appear to be a stretch to many people around the world, and indeed many of us in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, we really looked hard at those numbers and questioned. There was a lot of anxiety back in 2016 when we launched the vision. Are we going to be able to do it? Amazingly, we're ahead of target. Our GDP has increased from 2.6 trillion in nominal terms to 4.1 trillion. Our standing amongst the G20 countries has leapfrogged to number 16. And going back to your question, the underpinning, the major underpinning of that GDP leapfrog going forward is investment. We, at the time of, beginning of this decade, end of previous decades, gross capital formation as a percentage of a small GDP was less than 22%. Third quarter of 23, we have the data. The gross capital formation is close to 28%. The target in the National Investment Strategy is to grow capital formation in the kingdom, which is, of course, all capital spending and investment, to grow it to 30%. So we've gone from below 22% to 28%. And the stretch target that we were worried as a Minister of Investment, are we going to be able to create that much capital in the economy, draw that much capital? We're actually ahead of target. The other encouraging part when you think of a global story is that FDI is also growing ahead of target. Our FDI stock, this is the net of inflows and outflows, has grown by 52% since the vision was started and since the National Investment Strategy has gone. Our flows year on year have gone from below 1% of GDP to over 3% of GDP. Our target is 4.7% of GDP, which is a very healthy rate for an economy of our size and maturity. And the last thing I would mention is both domestic investment and international investment are seeking the right growth sectors. It's well known that the kingdom has been investing heavily in oil and gas, the sector I used to work in, and in industries associated and underpinned by the kingdom's amazing competitive position when it comes to fossil fuels and oil and gas. Petrochemicals, in particular refineries, have been the main source of FDI. And I think the amazing story in very few years is that global FDI as well as domestic investment is seeking now tourism, retail, consumption, by the way, is the second underpinning of GDP growth after investment. And this consumption, whether domestic or international, through the increase of number of travelers, is also providing a big pull for investments. All of this, what I just mentioned, is going to provide real assets available for the financial markets to securitize, to spin off, to create derivatives, to fund during building of these projects, both equity and credit, but then to create a vibrant capital market that the organizers of this conference are more than able to grow and take it from being 9, 10 today in terms of total capitalization to, as Sarah mentioned, the ambition of being one of the top 3.
We will definitely discuss the role of the capital markets in helping achieve those targets. But when we talk about the economy and the components that are recording growth, we have to ask His Excellency Minister Al-Ibrahim about the non-oil GDP specifically. When we look at last year's figures, of course, the oil GDP had a sharp contraction as a result of the oil production cuts, but the non-oil GDP recorded a healthy growth of 4.6% in 2023. So could you shed some more light on how was that achieved?
Sure, thank you, Nadine. First of all, it's a great pleasure and honor to be here. I think, as His Excellency said, the capital markets and the wider financial sector are not only a sector in its own right that's contributing to the economy, it's also a sector that's enabling this growth. It's, as one of my colleagues says, the veins and the blood. It's fueling this transformation. And we've been very fortunate that this sector has been mature in terms of its institutionalization for a long time, and that led to output that is very competitive, I'd say, in terms of policies and regulations. And all the thanks go to our leadership, but also the leadership and the teams in these regulator institutions, but also on the public administration side and the private sector and the financial institution. And I think we're also more fortunate because now in a time of transformation, we can count on the sector and the capital markets to evolve more and be part of this transformation, enable it, and I believe that's why we're here today. Why we're seeing this growth? Of course, we had a record growth overall GDP in 2022 of 8.7 as the fastest G20 economy, but also underpinning that was growth of non-oil activities at 5.9%. And today we see non-oil activities growing at 4.6% according to the Statistics Authority's flash estimates. That's still healthy growth over the 5.9%. And I think the reason is, among many things, is commitment. If you look at this vision, 7 years strong, so many countries and so many institutions announce visions and transformation plans, but 2 or 3 years later, it just isn't still fresh. Today, the Vision 2030 is still top of mind. It's still our true north. And there's still the same commitment we saw in the first year. We're seeing it today. And on top of that, we're seeing delivery that we're seeing in the economic activities that are driven by more sectors than ever before. We saw it in the beginning, pre-COVID, in financial services, then we saw investments, then more recently, in the last year, we saw tourism or exported services. In the first half, they grew at 135% year over year. In 2023, I think the first 3 quarters, we saw transport and storage grow at 9%. We saw hospitality and restaurants grow at 7.2%. We saw retail and wholesale grow at 6.8%. Business and finance and finance, insurance, business services at 5.2%, and many more. These are significantly larger numbers than what we've seen before at a time of, I'd say, challenge in our tough neighborhood, like His Excellency, the Minister of Finance mentioned. So the beautiful thing is that we're seeing more and more activities coming from more sectors, which is telling us that this transformation, this diversification is working. And obviously, we want to see more. The job is still not done. And hopefully, with our partners in the capital markets and the impact they will have on the overall economy by facilitating a lot of this growth and investment, we'll see even more results as we go.
Your Excellency, Mr. Towijery, one of the major vehicles of the government in driving that change is through the NDF. Can you explain to us the mandate of the National Development Fund and what has been achieved so far?
Well, thank you. If you look at the vision objectives, the main one is it's a private sector-led economy in the future. And when we looked at the full ecosystem, we have a great capital markets, we have a very disciplined budgetary process, we have a very solid rating, but the private sector enablement and the development agenda was a little bit of a gap in the system. We had great funds historically, some of them is 50 years old, and we looked at the new emerging sectors as well, like tourism, culture, SMEs, infrastructure, etc. So the idea behind the National Development Fund is working as a development financial institutions to enable the private sector to achieve its objectives within the Vision 2030. This is very, very important. To do that, we were able in the last few years to establish 6 new funds. We had 6 in the past, and we established new funds like tourism, culture, SME, EXIM, infrastructure funds. So the collective ecosystem of the national infrastructure is to make sure the private sector is enabled, the system is able to live and survive shocks if it happens, and it was demonstrated during COVID, where NDF has contributed around 30 billion riyals to vulnerable sectors in the economy.
Your Excellency, Mr. الفالح, when you mentioned sectors that are attracting investments, traditionally Saudi Arabia had always attracted investments into everything that is related to energy. Today, can you shed some more light on which investments, which sectors are attracting the most investments? And I would also like you to explain a little bit about privatization, because we also have a banker audience with us. So if we were to explain what are the sectors that are next for privatization and PPP deals as well.
Well, I think as I listened to His Excellency Faisul Ibrahim describe the growth of the underlying economy, it is very much a mirror image of where we're seeing the foreign capital flow, FDI. Manufacturing last year had about a third of the total FDI coming into as a flow, and it continues to lead in terms of FDI stock, and you see it around the kingdom that, you know, companies that are investing in our large and growing manufacturing sector. And, you know, being someone who came from industry, I believe that's a great precursor for sustainability and development of the economy. Manufacturing is not only targeting the domestic economy, but for the kingdom, manufacturing is an export play, and we are attracting at scale large manufacturing global champions to come to the kingdom and create a foundation for realizing one of the strengths and the objectives of Vision 2030, which is being a connector of 3 continents, not just logistically, not just in terms of travel and communication and digital connectivity, but importantly to be a hub for manufacturing. There has been a program launched by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince called the Global Supply Chain Resilience Initiative. His Excellency Jadaan talked about how companies around the world and countries around the world are crafting policies for nearshoring and friendshoring. One of the concepts we talked about in Davos this year is something that we believe the kingdom is uniquely positioned for, which is green shoring rather than nearshoring. And green shoring capitalizes on our strength in the kingdom of being able to decarbonize manufacturing value chains, capitalizing on our green energy abundance of solar, wind, carbon capture and sequestration of fossil fuel electricity production, embedding that into value chains. So today, there is huge demand on the kingdom for FDI, for people who want to produce green steel, green aluminum, green fertilizers, green chemicals, and take it to global markets, capitalizing also on special economic zones that were launched last year. The demographics of the kingdom are also a great strength, underpinning strength, because they give us both the talent that will fuel all of the investments taking place, but it's also a strong consumption base that investors work for. And that's reflective in that retail is also a big attraction. Wholesale and retail globally is a source or a pull on FDI. Tourism has brought in a lot of investors in hospitality, food and beverage, recreation. I would also, as I look at Nabil Koshak with us in the audience, mention that a very important fuel for any modern economy today is innovation and entrepreneurship and the spirit of startups. And I don't think there is an economy that is growing that part of the economy as much as Saudi Arabia is. So one of the exciting things we're seeing is the rapid pace through which startups are taking place. Many of them are quickly turning into unicorns. Many of them will be approaching the capital market authority regulators and Tadawul to IPO these companies, either through Numu or the main capital markets. But at the end of the day, FDI today is, maybe 20% of our total investments. So it is very important because it brings global brands, it brings integration to global markets. As I mentioned, these companies will quickly integrate to Saudi. But the real workhorse and investment are the domestic investors, are companies that are already listed, the PIF portfolio companies, the Sharik companies that have been supported by the government to identify opportunities and to incentivize them, and the family companies, which we're very proud of. They constitute a significant part of the economy. And going forward, the next component that I have to say has not performed as well as we wanted to, and I say this in all transparency, is SMEs, other than the startups, which are the innovative. So I think as we build this resilient economy, the greatest story that's still not told enough of this century, I think we have to diagnose and do what is necessary to build the full pyramid of private sector and investment in the kingdom, and the foundation is going to be our SMEs, which we will pay attention to.
Can you very quickly tell us about the privatization and PPPs? What are the sectors coming into market, and what is the dollar amount? Because the NCP says more than $50 billion, something it's much higher.
Okay, first of all, globally, there are trillions of dollars of dry powder that private equity firms, fund asset managers are sitting on that is not fully deployed, and much of it is looking for long-term investments in infrastructure and the like, and real estate and alternative investments. And that's where privatization, as well as securitizing our real estate deal flow that is taking place in the kingdom, and some of it is by the PIF, is going to offer a huge volume of capital that will go into the capital markets. Some of it through debt capital markets that was addressed by His Excellency Al-Jad'an, and some of it will go through other avenues. The privatization program has taken time to mature. It has, and His Excellency Al-Jad'an has been very patiently, he says he's impatient, but he's also very deliberate and very careful about doing things right in terms of having the underlying regulatory framework. And I think all of us owe him a debt of gratitude of putting the privatization law in place that was just released 18 months ago or so. But that's underpinning today the transparency and the regulatory environment that will allow a substantial backlog of privatization that will come. So far, I think one indication of how privatization and how much appetite there is to look at the Aramco deals in 22 and 21. Collectively, it's about 100 billion riyals, 2 deals. Privatization program has also done many good projects in water and electricity generation. Most of them are PPPs for long period. I think the silos from the Ministry of Agriculture have been a great story in privatization. But I believe that is the tip of the iceberg. The assets that we will have in Kingdom. Think of all, Abha Airport. I was talking to GACA. They were expecting 10 expressions of interest. They got 99 expressions of interest in a regional airport. Imagine if we do Riyadh as a PPP, or some of the other larger airports with the ambitions in travel and tourism. And that will happen. That is inevitable to happen many of our national assets that are commercialized. His Excellency Al-Jad'an chairs هيئة العقارات الدولة, the government assets, and I've talked to them. They intend to securitize and put in the market many of the government buildings and assets that are currently sitting idle and not activating the capital market and drawing the capital that we need.
Your Excellency, Mr. Ibrahim, if you would like to shed light on this point, the privatization, but I also, for me, what's important is also to discuss the growth of the sectors going forward. We know that so far in the diversification, there have been some sectors which exceeded expectations. I know that you call them the tourism plus, but going forward, what will be the sectors that will contribute to the most change in the makeup of the economy of the kingdom on the long term?
Sure. Before I get there, maybe just on the title of this session and maybe a quick story. When we were in Davos, I was on a panel and there was President Tharman from Singapore and there were two other colleagues. And in the closing round, each of these two colleagues was plugging their book. And then the turn came to me and I didn't even read the book in the last 12 months. Last book I read was in Eid. But of course, I think most of my colleagues are reading books worth of material every day, preparing for the discussions and the debates and the back and forth. But I told them that I don't have a book, but Saudi Arabia has a playbook that everyone is looking into. So this title is real. We've been campaigning for Expo, some of us, for Riyadh to host Expo, and consistently every country we meet, either they're talking about Vision 2030 or they have a copy of it, or they're looking at the updates because they want to know how the kingdom is doing what it's doing out of nowhere, almost. Recently, we were with one of His Excellency Al-Jad'an's colleagues from a large European economy, and consistently this gentleman was saying, we wish we were doing things as fast as you were. How do you do it? We think we are mature, we think we are sophisticated, et cetera, but here you are 7 years strong, pulling this transformation, and you're still only getting started. That said, there's a lot of successes, but there's also a lot of challenges, a lot of things we didn't get right the first time that we're adamant to get right the second time, the third time. And His Excellency alluded to the kingdom and the strategies having a transparent performance culture that we have. So some sectors, obviously, we want to see all the sectors evolve and unlock their potential. We look at every sector and we say, what can this sector do to our story? What can this sector do to other sectors? What can it contribute to the economy? What do we need from this sector? And because of that, a lot of strategies evolved because we need a clear path of how these sectors will evolve. Last year alone, 30 strategies were launched between sectoral, cross-cutting, and regional. And that's not the number of strategies that we're reviewing on a continuous basis in the center of government, in the Strategic Management Committee, which is chaired by His Royal Highness. There's a lot of progress. Tourism, for example, achieved their targets, their 2030 targets, and upped them to 150 million visitors by 2030, and its contribution to the economy also has been increased. Logistics, we went up in 17 ranks a year ago or a year plus ago, and that has a huge impact on how we do business. So every strategy is succeeding in its KPIs. Some are having some challenges in their KPIs, and we're sitting together to see how we can unlock these constraints and figure out what are these challenges, but they're all moving forward. And some strategies are long lead ones that require more capability building, more long-term view, and more investment that we're adamant to make sure they contribute. Speaking of the sectors that we want to see more growth in, you mentioned Tourism Plus. We simplify it. We say it's Tourism Plus and Industry Plus. The reason we say this is because if you cut all the sectors in the kingdom, you'll see resource sectors. These are leading sectors. But the growth there is not that unlimited. You also have following sectors or the sectors that are locally focused. Here also, we worry about people being drawn too much to the construction boom and the transformation boom and the economic boom that the kingdom is witnessing. But the reality is this is limited by how big the kingdom is and how big the local demand is, even if it will double or more over the next 10 years. What truly we focus on is the non-oil tradables, the sectors that are externally focused, and here it's goods and services. Services, we call it tourism plus for simplification, and we've talked about the numbers. This is tourism, culture, sports, entertainment, etc. The edge here is to have a user experience that is second to none, and that also offers a value that is very competitive regionally and globally. And this is by its own a sector and activity that didn't exist before, that we want to plug into the economic landscape, but also this serves as a soft infrastructure to attract talent and people and visitors who can help us with the other group, which is Industry Plus. Here we have mining, advanced manufacturing, logistics, and anything that helps us produce goods that are competitive and complex and that can survive and do well in the external markets.
Mr. Towiejri, you mentioned 6 new funds in addition to the 6 funds that were existing. What are the sectors today that you think require the most support from NDF, but that the government thinks that it will have the most impact going forward in changing the economy?
So as a general rule, anything that's non-oil revenue driven, anything that improves our balance of payment, anything that creates jobs, is definitely something we will support. That's a general rule. We do, however, have a socio-economic discipline across the board to make sure we're targeted, we're long-term, and we're sustainable. So if you apply these 2 rules, then we will end up, at least from a developmental agenda, is to support everything that serves these objectives and the KPIs of sectorial strategies, etc. But to specifically answer your question, I think the SME sector is very close to our heart. It's a job creator, it's long-term, it's safety. If we want to be really an export-driven private sector economy, if we want to be really a car manufacturer, then we need to have a very, very strong SME sector. Hence, we created the SME bank. We make sure the other 11 funds have an SME element into it. Infrastructure is another thing. Again, if we want to grow and make sure that investors come here and make sure that tourism really flourish, infrastructure is key. His Excellency mentioned privatization. This is also supportive of the overall infrastructure system. And the new economies, like His Excellency Fayisal tried to mention, is very important to diversify the economy. So in summary, the new economies in a very good discipline to make sure we achieve a private sector-led economy.
Can you explain to us, when you say enabling the SME sector, how do you do that? And could you shed light also a little bit on the financials? How much firepower is there? Yes. What is the role that the financial markets can play in supporting this agenda?
So historically, the SME did not have a very good funding in the system. Commercial banks were a little bit shy for many reasons, not only in the kingdom, but very few countries in the world really cracked that segment of the economy. So one, we wanted to fill the gap of what the commercial bank is doing, and we become the equity or the major participant in this sector. So this is one objective. Second, we want to really support everything that's taking place. So when we look at the PIF portfolio, for example, the Giga projects, this needs a massive SME behind them to operate in the future, to do the maintenance, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the philosophy behind SMEs. NDF in general is going to deploy around 600 billion in the economy. I would say at least 20% of that is going to the SME sector across the funds in the next 7 to 8 years.
Your Excellency, Mr. Ibrahim, when you mentioned the national investment strategy today, how will you finance the objectives of that strategy, and what role can the capital markets play to finance that?
So the national investment strategy that His Excellency talked about is composed of many, I'd say, segments or components. You have FDI, which is around 15 to 20% of that 12.3, 12.4 trillion real target. You have the private sector, PIF, and several other components. I think in the private sector, everything we're doing is designed to grow the private sector, so its contribution to the economy grows to 65%, but also have specific programs and initiatives like the National Incentives Committees and its work, but also Sharik, that's there to fuel more private sector growth and private sector investment. We also have FDI and the programs that His Excellency mentioned on attracting growth in FDI. And also in general, I mean, there's two ways to fund it. Either it's the gross national savings or net capital inflows. And when it comes to savings, we believe with the added contribution and activity from various segments of society, there used to be a lot of idle capacity that's coming into the labor force. Female labor force participation rates went up, as you know, to 36%, beyond our target of 30%. Now the target is 40% in 2030. Every time someone achieves a target, they get in trouble because the target goes up after that. But there's more activity in that. There's a different behavior. There's more financial literacy, which leads to more savings. And we think with this economic activity, more savings are going to be in the system, more liquidity and more indirect, I'd say, fuel for more investments to be made. You also have the surplus from the budget and the debt that's being issued that's either going to more capex or going to the National Development Fund to support selectively the projects that are of a certain priority. But then there comes the capital market, which has evolved significantly. In the equity side, I think in the last 10 years or less, it attracted 180 to 200 billion riyals into the market. On the debt side today, it's around 4.1% of our GDP, and the target is to go to 18% by 2030. And they will play a significant role, the ECM and the DCM solutions that are available towards attracting capital to the projects that we need to see grow, and it's high quality capital, long-term capital that can help fuel this transformation further.
Your Excellency, Mr. الفالح, let's end this session with you. Our time is up, but I would like to hear your thoughts on how the ECM and DCM can play a role in helping finance those massive ambitions. And I would also like you to shed light on the source of capital, local versus foreign, because so far there has been a heavy reliance on local capital. And of course, foreign is going to cost more. So at what point will you make that transition?
Actually, direct offshore lending has been increasing quite fast, at 30% per annum over the last few years. I think cumulatively there is $200 billion of offshore lending to Saudi entities. This is non-sovereign. But that's not where we want to go. I think, as mentioned by His Excellency Jad'an, His Excellency Ibrahim just now, I think as we grow our economy, the debt capital markets creating enough. Today, I think less than 3% is the data I have, is the size of the private debt capital market, non-government, as a percent of GDP, and the average G20 is north of 50%. And obviously we have to crawl before we walk, before we run. So as mentioned, His Excellency Al-Guwais is taking this on as his tasks, and he will get us to a decent percentage. I've talked to him about needing to have achievable but high ambition on our way of becoming. And the debt capital market will help the kingdom also become the financial hub for the region. Ultimately, a lot of foreign capital will come into our capital markets to participate in these issuances of debt paper that is financing Saudi projects, but as the locomotive of the larger region, I believe a vibrant debt capital market that parallels the equity markets that we have today in Tadawul will go a long way of helping us fund the vision projects, but also build a very robust pillar of our economy, which is a strong financial sector with strong global participation. I will end by saying to our international participants in this conference is please raise your ambition. Riyadh is not only the kingdom's capital. Riyadh is the Middle East capital. His Royal Highness, another statement he has said is the Middle East is going to be the new Europe. There is a renaissance that is going to follow the unfortunate turmoil and problems that we've had in the Middle East. And this country, with its leadership, this capital, with its vibrant financial sector that is already strong and going to get stronger, is going to play a big part of bringing global capital into the region. Our regional headquarter program, which we in the Ministry of Investment lead and participate in, has already exceeded the targets. We have north of 300 companies that are operating companies, some of them from the financial sector. But we want the financial sector to think of having their regional operations, managing what is happening in the region from Riyadh, and I believe the Financial Sector Development Program chaired by His Excellency Al-Jad'an, our well-recognized regulators, CMA and Central Bank will incubate this international financial center that is going to be the next part of this story of this century.
We hope that the geopolitical situation helps us, and hope that Riyadh will reach its ambitions and the whole Middle East region as well. Your Excellencies, thank you very much for being here with us today, and for the audience, thank you for listening to us. I hope you found the session as interesting and informative as I did. Thank you.